Hello and welcome to The Fix. I'm Michael Walker.
I'm James Butler.
And today we're talking about two topics, free speech and the Freemasons. Free speech filled the airwaves this weekend because of a demonstration at the University of the West of England where some protesters disrupted a speech by Jacob Rees-Mogg, who is currently the favourite to replace Theresa May as Tory leader. A terrifying prospect. We're going to talk about the usefulness or otherwise of this demonstration later in the show. But first, there's been quite a lot of misreporting about it. So we want to get the facts clear. So we're going to start by looking at a video of the event and then we'll break down what went on. Back. So what you saw, there were some people with black masks at the back. I don't think you saw it at that bit of the video, but at the beginning they're chanting, no platform for racists, no platform for sexists. And then there were a scuffle. So lots of the news afterwards made out that this protest had been violent. What you can clearly see from that video is that the first punch was thrown by a Jacob Rees-Mogg fan. So this wasn't a violent protest, it was a disruptive protest, but the violence came from Mogg's side. And there's actually more information that's come out since. This wasn't just any old Jacob Rees-Mogg fan. So Squawk has done some excellent investigative reporting today and has looked up this guy. I'm hoping we're going to get that on the screen now. So this guy is called Paul Townsend. We know his name because he gave it to a student newspaper on the day. Sorry, Paul Townsley. He gave it to a student newspaper on the day. They've looked him up on Facebook. And he has a penchant for dressing up as a particular historical group of people. Can you guess who Paul Townsley likes to dress up at when he goes to parties, when he goes to fancy dress parties?
Would it be a Nazi?
A Nazi, yeah. He dresses up as the SS when he's going to parties.
Jesus Christ.
So it's not necessarily particularly surprising that the kind of people who go to Jacob Rees-Mogg talks are also the kind of people who think it's funny to dress up as someone from the SS at a party. We know that Jacob Rees-Mogg has himself attended meetings of what is a neo-fascist organisation, Traditional Britain. They want not the expropriation. They want to get rid of non-white people from Britain. So yeah, there's a dodgy character here. And the plot potentially thickened today, gets slightly more tenuous here. But from this guy, we're going to look at some images now which suggest that this guy might not have just been any old attendee at this Jacob Rees-Mogg talk. We're going to get... So, this guy in the background, who does he look like, James?
He looks like a guy.
So lots of people on Twitter are saying that is Paul Townsley. I mean...
I think
It's difficult to confirm either way. What have we got up next? So, again, people are saying, is that Paul Townsley working for this particular...
Is it not just a stock? Okay.
I don't think that could be Paul Townsley. And then... So that's a security firm, and then this is the same security firm working for Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Yeah. I mean, that seems clear.
Jacob Rees-Mogg has denied that this guy was his security guard. I've messaged the guy on Facebook. He hasn't got back to me yet. Messaged Paul Townsley. And Squawk have called up the security firm, and they're getting back to them tomorrow. So we'll keep you updated on whether this story really is as deep as it seems. But leaving that to one side, we're going to talk about the protest in general. Was it a useful thing to do? So, James, what's your take on this protest against Jacob Rees-Mogg's speech?
So, you know, I really sympathise with anyone who wants to object to the existence of Jacob Rees-Mogg, who wants to object to his politics, who wants to raise their voice against, you know, this guy who is homophobic, who is consistently anti-choice, who is a misogynist, who is a throwback to all the kind of things we thought we had left behind many, many years ago. I sympathise with all of that. I don't think the most effective way to do it is to walk into a room when there's just a few of you and start sort of, while you're masked up so you look kind of intimidating and threatening, and start shouting things and sort of making noise. I understand, and the thing I want to do here is not to condemn the protesters for doing it or for wanting to kind of raise objections to Rees-Mogg, but to say, there's a better way to do this, and this tactic just didn't work here.
I think the point was the optics were bad. So this protest didn't show the strength of opposition to Jacob Rees-Mogg's opinions. Obviously, there were 50 to 100 people at that talk wanting to listen to him, and there were 10 people in the background who entered to disrupt it, dressed in black masks quite unnecessarily. It's not illegal to do that anyway. So what it did look like was a minority disrupting a larger group of people who just wanted to listen to someone. It also put Jacob Rees-Mogg on exactly the terrain he wants to be on, which is defending freedom of speech.
And I think that's so important, right?
Yeah, because he doesn't want to be on the radio defending low regulation Britain or defending going to speak to traditional Britain a few years ago or talking about his opinions on abortion or gay people. He doesn't want to be talking about that, but free speech, that's perfect for him. And that's what the conversation was about all weekend. So this time around, I agree with you. This isn't to try and make anyone feel bad. Anyone who wants to try and make a difference and challenge abhorrent views, that's great, but this wasn't really the way to do it. And the one thing that suggests the Tories were quite happy about what happened on the weekend is they announced that they are going to ramp up their tour of British universities. And what this looks like to me is that the Tories want to start a US-style campus culture war. So currently their opinions are quite unpopular on the economy. The left is winning the argument about nationalisation. The left is winning the argument about the NHS. So what do they want to do? They want a massive distraction, which is a campus war where they can say the left are extremists who want to shut down debate when we're just saying reasonable things. We need to not fall into that trap, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also important to understand that the British public generally like freedom of speech, right? And that's a very, very easy win. And if you're going to make arguments about people, shouldn't be permitted to be doing something, then you have to be kind of watertight, really, really watertight.
But no platform, it's not that clear-cut to say no platform is always the wrong thing to do.
No.
And James, you've been looking into some of the history of this as a strategy on the left, when it has worked, when it hasn't.
Yeah, that's true. And so, I mean, the thing that we have to remember, and the thing that's important for all of us to kind of recognise, is that no platforming as a tactic emerged out of a period in which the National Front were on the rise. So we're talking sort of 1960s, 1970s here. National Front were making some quite serious electoral advances, right? They were, looking like they were doing terrifyingly well, and they were part of a very, very strong and very, very violent street movement as well. So obviously there were earlier instances of confrontations with fascists. So very famously, Cable Street, and intermittent kind of anti-fascist activism on the streets. That's not. Not an innovation of the 1960s, but you had the National Front, you had the Monday Club within the Conservative Party, it was explicitly kind of neo-fascist organisation. But the point of this tactic was to recognise that fascists need two things, and they were doing two things at the time. One is this extremely well-organised, very confrontational, very violent street movement. But the second is, by participating within the sphere of politics itself, legitimating their ideas, so grabbing institutional footholds, being regarded as legitimate subjects for debate. So no platform arises from a recognition that fascists were organising politically, and that fascism wasn't just about having views that you find abhorrent, right? It was more to do with the fact that you are engaging in organisation, political organisation of those views, in such a way as to violently shut down meetings of the left, for instance. So the National Front very famously would go and smash up left-wing meetings, mass meetings. They would organise to march through areas which are inhabited by migrants. So this is an organisation that has both political and on-street presence. So no platform emerged as a policy. It was passed in the National Union of Students as a political recognition on the left that denying these people that kind of political presence was absolutely vital for shutting down that specific manifestation of fascism. Now, what happens after that is that all the left kind of recognises that this is the thing that you do. with fascists. And then, like often happens with these kind of political decisions and tactical policies, it becomes broadened out and becomes a kind of catch-all tactic that's used for things that are beyond fascism. So there's a controversy in the 1980s, when Keith Joseph, who's a Tory sort of grandee, comes to give a talk at the University of Essex, and they attempt to no-platform him. And one of the things to say is that this tactic often comes into question when the question is, okay, so where is the precise boundary of the far right and the just racist conservative right? And the fact is that the boundaries are often porous. So these decisions are often sort of very difficult to make precisely. There's not always a hard and fast rule.
I think that point about that kind of organising, and especially what we now call Antifa, which is sort of like you potentially hide your identity and you're out there ready to take part in physical activity or self-defence or whatever you want to call it. So I was looking through some of a very good article actually on the history of this, but it had this quote from an SWP pamphlet from the 70s and 80s. Obviously, we have many problems with the SWP at this point in time, but back then they had done quite a lot of useful things. The Rock Against Racism.
Very interesting.
So anyway, from this pamphlet it says, "We do not engage in this sort of activity because we like violence or because the National Front are reactionary. There are many other reactionary organisations around, for instance the Tory party, which we do not attempt to smash up. The National Front differs from the Tories because their aims are precisely to control the streets, to build a mass fighting movement. In this, they need marches and rallies." So it's saying, we're using this particular strategy because it's shutting down what is their strategy, which is to build a street movement. And I think you can look for a very contemporary example of this in terms of America, 2 events in America last year. So one was Charlottesville, where there were fascists on the Friday they were there with tiki torches, looking kind of normie, and then on the Saturday they were turning up sort of all dressed up for a fight. Obviously someone tragically got killed, but to that event there were lots of anti-fascists who were there also ready to fight or ready to face up to people who came ready to engage in physical violence. And afterwards there was quite a powerful quote by some black activists.
It was Reverend Sekou.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was. Some black activists who hadn't gone there as Antifa, but they said at one point the only thing between them and the fascist protesters was Antifa. So in that street moment when the fascists were intending to be threatening in the street, that tactic really worked. One place where I think it's less clear-cut that it worked was Milo Yiannopoulos. So he is a guy who has a huge platform already, and his oxygen is by being controversial and by provoking the left online. The only way you're really going to shut him down is if you take away all his internet devices. But what protesters tried to do at Berkeley was shut down the talk, all dressed up in black bloc, quite violent. I don't think they hurt anyone, but quite sort of like, it looked violent on the news. And what that gave Milo Yiannopoulos was this opportunity to say, I am a defender of free speech, which was exactly what he wanted, and didn't really in any way stop him achieving the kind of strategy and successes that he's adopting to build his own political capital. Yeah,
so I would agree with you in general, but I think Milo is one of those cases that is really, really interesting because it's exactly where local considerations play into the tactical question about how you deal with this. And that question it is an important one because so the thing that was going around the alt-right prior to that appearance in Berkeley was that he was going to out undocumented students on campus. And then I think you can make a claim.
You can do that on Twitter anyway, though, right?
Right, yeah, sure. But you can make a reasonable defence that shutting down that was in the interest of preventing that happening. I think the broader point to draw from this, and the important one, is the question you always have to ask is, where are the fascists now? One of the things we know about fascism, one of the things we know about the hard right, the ultra right, is that it changes, right? The way in which these people engage with politics changes because of the topography of politics, right? The way politics is conducted changes. So in the 70s, politics involved mass meetings. Now, mass meetings are still a part of politics, but the vast majority of people don't engage with politics through that form. They engage in other forms. People's relationship to politics is heavily mediated now, even more than it was in the mid-20th century. And that means that we have to think about different weapons, about how we're going to fight this kind of stuff, because relying solely on no platform, where it is important and where it does matter, I think it needs to be upheld. But relying solely on no platform doesn't deal with those situations in which you have fascists who have already a massive platform, who have already enormous media presence, who have, who are setting the agenda, who are setting common sense. And the danger of coming from a background in which politics is just about shutting that stuff down is when you find yourself in the political arena, on the news, arguing against a fascist, you suddenly don't have the resources with which to argue with them. So what this means to me is that we have to be really, really canny about understanding how these people are operating and understand that the weapons with which we must fight them change with time. No tactic is universal. There is not a universal strategy for fighting fascism, but we do need to fight it.
Mm-hmm. And you've got one example here of someone who categorically was a fascist.
Yeah,
and this has come out. This has been written up today, wasn't it?
It was written up by Dominic Cassini, who's the Home Affairs reporter for the BBC today. And there has been... So this is one of the things to say is that classical fascism, neo-Nazi revivalism is only a very small part of the revival of kind of contemporary fascisms. But it nonetheless does still exist. And some of the most violent and most kind of terrifying elements are attracted to it. So there was a story here which was about this kid, sort of 19-year-old or so, and his name was, and hopefully we will see some images of him shortly. So this is a guy who has just been found guilty of sort of attempted murder and sort of also an explosives charge. I believe he had, he was found with explosives in his flat. This is a guy who's 19. Lived in Barrow, so quite, the town has a sort of nuclear industry, in fact, but very little else. He realised, so this is a guy who had nothing in his life really. He sort of had no friends really, no girlfriend, no kind of relationships. Lived alone in this kind of tiny, quite sad-looking flat, images from the police raids. Has like a massive swastika flag hung up, but quite bare otherwise. Sort of computer table with various...
You're painting quite an image.
Yeah. Well, so this guy sees that this pub in Barrow is doing a gay pride night, and it's only the second time they've ever hosted one. And he's going out and doing reconnaissance. A couple of weeks beforehand, he bought a machete. He had posted a video of himself on his Facebook burning a gay flag because he said, I don't want my children to grow up in a world in which this is okay. And he'd done this reconnaissance and could come back home and posted on his secret neo-Nazi Facebook group that he was going to go with his machete and injure these people and hopefully murder these people. And it is only because by accident he happened to have added someone he was at school with or who was a friend of his on Facebook to his secret neo-Nazi group by accident that she alerted the police and they caught him heading there to carry this out. So, I mean, these poor people in this pub, sort of armed police kind of crash in. But the thing I think that is important here is, there's various things going on in this trial. He's sort of suddenly revealed he was bisexual and troubled about it during the course of his defence. It's not something for which there was any evidence beforehand. And in fact, in his statements to police, he talks about how neo-Nazi he is. But the thing I think that is really, really essential is that this is a guy who had very, very little in his life. He wasn't working. He didn't have kind of connections with other people. He found his way to this kind of politics through the internet, through finding these, online hate sites. It's not just Stormfront, but all of this kind of network of kind of proliferating fascist propaganda. No contact with formal organisations, other than, I think, applying to join National Action and being rejected. Nonetheless, went to carry this out. So the means of coming to this politics is not via mass meeting and organising physically with other fascists. The way he came to his politics was through the internet, through fascist propaganda, and partly one thinks as a consequence of these kind of really kind of desperate and quite bleak lives. So that's something that we should be thinking about, the way in which the conditions breed people for whom this feels like the politics that that offers them, if not hope, then some kind of revenge on a world that seems to be leaving them behind.
We're going to go to a break now. The video you're going to see in the break gives you a sort of hint about what we're going to talk about next. It's not very difficult to guess. We'll see you in about a minute.
Who controls the British crown? Who keeps the metric system down? We do. We do.
Who leaves Atlantis off the maps?
Who keeps the Martians under wraps? We do. We do. Who holds back the electric car? Who makes Steve Gutenberg a czar? We do. We do. Who robs Kingfish of their sight?
Who rigged every Oscar night?
We do.
That's right, we're talking about the Freemasons. We're protecting ourselves from their rays.
Orbital
Right
mind
now.
control lasers.
So The Guardian reported yesterday that there are 2 Freemasons lodges in Westminster. There is New Welcome Lodge, which recruits MPs, peers and parliamentary staff. And there is Gallery Lodge, established for members of the political press corps. So that's the lobby journalists. So this is not particularly surprising that there are some Freemasons within the British establishment still. But what is the significance of this revelation, James? I know you've done a lot of research on these guys.
Well, I say one of the things to tell our listeners
take
is
it off
I
now.
remove this kind of slightly preposterous tinfoil hat that stay woke, the mind control lasers are out to get you. So I love conspiracy theories. I think they're tremendously interesting and they tell us an enormous amount about the cultures from which they're generated. So they tell you a lot about the political times you live in.
And how Princess Diana died, how the World Trade Center came down,
and we can come back
how the
to
crop circles got made.
We can come. Well, I mean, it's all about Area 51.
You continue.
It's all about Area 51, man. But so we can come back to the question of conspiracy theories themselves. But I am interested in the history of these kind of secret societies. I'm interested in the history of the Freemasons. And so the thing to say is that actually contemporary Freemasonry is probably largely innocuous. So the point of it is that they go through these kind of series of secret rituals that tells you how to be moral, right? And how you should be a good person, that all people are equal, although you can only join if you're a man. And so on and so on. So mostly these days, and particularly in Britain, it's just kind of old guys eating charity dinners and sort of doing kind of strange rituals in aprons and things. However, what we do know is that when these organizations, and it's not just Freemasons, but Freemasons are often the most prominent ones, when these organizations get into centers of power, then they often become something else entirely. So the thing that worries me is if you have public officials, people who have to declare financial interests, people who have to declare contact with, say, lobbyists if they're ministers, people who have to declare a raft of things that we say that they should declare because we should have a right of scrutiny over who they meet, who they're hanging out with, who they have contact with. For them to then be part of a secret organization, or an organization their membership of which is secret, to meet in these informal networks, it's just rife for a cover-up. And it doesn't say something very good about the way in which these people think of democracy. They think of their democratic role as, that they can, they don't have to declare this because it's part of their secret, personal life. And it may be completely harmless, but what we know is that when people in power have these little networks, and with Freemasonry, South Yorkshire Police is a really, really prominent one. We know that Masonic meetings were key in the Hillsborough cover-up. We know they were, key in sort of the cover-up around the murder of the investigator Daniel Morgan. We know that these Masonic meetings were also probably key in some of the Savile cover-ups. And, you know, so this is a very common thing, but it's kind of historical.
So how it works on a really basic level, the cover-ups, or what can be the negative consequences of these things, is that the Freemasons have people traditionally high up in the police, high up in the judiciary, high up in government, the civil service, MI5. And if you are a member of the Freemasons and you want something covered up, you can call on your friends high up in the police or high up in the judiciary to try and smother that investigation. And you can sort of rely on mutually beneficial networks to basically, in a way that's very untransparent, end investigations.
Yeah, and so this is like, it has been a kind of common thread of writing about Freemasonry through sort of the late 19th century and certainly in the 20th century, that there are these kind of secret signs that you can give if you're in trouble. So often there was a spate of people, particularly in the United States in like the kind of early 20th century, who would go into court and say, "Will nobody help the widow's son?" Which is supposed to be the kind of Masonic sign for getting you out of distress. I don't think it ever worked. All these kind of too obvious. Maybe the handshake is a better one. But the thing to say is that, like, actually the history of Freemasonry is rife with kind of organising going on within its ranks, and sometimes that's very good. Freemasonry played a huge role in the French Revolution, in the American Revolution, both of which, you know, emerge out of a sense that is very congruent with Freemasonry, that actually the aristocracy is no better than you and me. And for a kind of nascent bourgeoisie in France in the 18th century, Freemasonry was a way of sort of organising and meeting with other people on that level, not bound by kind of aristocratic convention. So it has a kind of important egalitarian history. There's also a fascinating history of black Freemasonry, quite important in Haiti. Also the kind of Prince Hall tradition in the United States. There's also, fascinatingly, many recent migrants often become Freemasons because they want entry into a pre-made network of people in the establishment. Where this goes wrong, again, is when it's close to power. And the classic example is the Italian Masonic lodge Propaganda Due. Now, this was a Masonic lodge that was taken over by a guy called Licio Gelli, who was involved in the Mussolini government, went to Argentina for a while, hid out in Argentina, came back and started running this Masonic lodge, which had among its members Silvio Berlusconi, but it also included Roberto Calvi, who was in charge of involved in the Vatican Bank, the Ambrosian Bank, just as that was collapsing. Calvi was found hanged underneath Blackfriars Bridge in 1981, very, very famously. Propaganda Due also involved in kind of all these sort of crypto-fascist, anti-communist networks, huge kind of bribery scandals, corruption scandals, really, really close to the heart of power in Italy. Still, very, very closely linked to Operation Gladio as well, this kind of stay-behind anti-communist network of kind of gun running, involved in running money to the Contras in Nicaragua. So this is an example of the kind of thing that could happen if these things are allowed to run unchecked. I don't think the lodge in Westminster is necessarily running guns, but
basically elite secret societies get up to some dodgy things, and if you're in a position of influence, that should be transparent.
I agree.
I'm just going to finish on two stories I picked out of that Guardian article. So one was that they are still influential in the police. So the outgoing chair of the Police Federation, Steve White, complained that the Freemasons were blocking modernisation in the police, and especially the progress of women. So he says, quote, "I found there were people who were fundamentally against any kind of change and any kind of progress, and they always happened to be Freemasons." So he sounds a bit pissed off at it. Presumably he wasn't one. And the unexpected fact I found out was that my favourite pet subject, which is mandatory reselection of Labour MPs, had a role in demasonifying the PLP. So this article said that in the 1980s, it was believed, or widely known basically, there were quite a lot of Labour MPs who were members of the Masons. And when mandatory reselection was introduced at the beginning of the 80s, a lot of these MPs got worried that if they were asked by their constituency members whether or not they're a member of the Freemasons, it could damage their ability to get reselected. So from that point onwards, many fewer Labour MPs have been part of the Freemasons. And even though they may have a positive history in some of these particular examples in the 19th century, I think the history of Freemasonry in Parliament is probably net negative.
Yes, I would say so.
I'm saying Labour MPs not being Freemasons is a good thing.
I mean, I think that's the key thing here, is that, like, I'm fascinated by conspiracy theories because they tell you a lot about the culture in which they live, in which they're generated, right? But outlandish theories, whether Freemasons, I don't know, are hiding that the earth is flat or something. This obscures, that quite boring but quite ordinary and quite casual corruption that these networks close to the heart of power can have. We should talk more about conspiracy theories on this show. I would love to at some other time because they're fascinating.
Tell us your favourite conspiracy theory. Give us the evidence and we might publish it. This was The Fix. We'll see you next week. It was a pleasure. Goodbye.
Bye.